In 1986, the world of cinema was introduced to the Australian comedy genius that is Paul Hogan, in the fish-out-of-water romantic comedy Crocodile Dundee. It tells the story of New York journalist Sue Charlton, played by Linda Kozlowski, who travels to the Australian outback to write an article on Mick Crocodile Dundee, a mysterious man of the land who supposedly had half his leg bitten off by a crocodile, of which, when Sue meets Mick, clearly isn't the case. As the two go hiking in the outback, it seems clear that Mick is something of a con man. But things soon become apparent that despite his innocent absent-mindedness with the ways of the world, Mick Dundee is in fact in tune with nature and his surroundings, and has great wisdom with the land he roams. So Sue then takes Mick back to New York with her so she can continue to write her story about him, where Mick tries to learn and adapt to the hustle and bustle of the New York City lifestyle, where comedic shenanigans ensue. But underneath all the comedy and gags lies Crocodile Dundee's heart, as it's a romantic comedy about the coming together of two people who are worlds apart, and yet somehow are complete when they're together. So today I thought that I'll check out an Australian movie for once. Yeah, how's that? An Australian reviewer who hasn't done an Australian movie yet. Well, get yourselves ready to try and understand some Aussie slang as we explore 10 things that you may not know about Crocodile Dundee. Let's check this out.
You can live on it, but it tastes like shit.
Number 10. Inspiration for the character. Although Paul Hogan has always been a national treasure ever since the early 70s thanks to his Australian comedy sketch show, The Hogan Show, his inspiration for Crocodile Dundee first took place when he visited New York City for the first time, as he felt like an outsider, completely out of his element. And what didn't help him on his visit was his Australian accent, as back then Americans weren't as accustomed to the accent and couldn't figure out just where the hell he came from. Supposedly people thought that he was Scottish, so I guess he wanted to channel that fish out of water feel that he had when he visited New York. Hogan would go on to say that he felt like Australia needed a good folk hero, and further stated, quote, "Ned Kelly is pathetic, and so are bushrangers." He's got a point. I mean, so many people in Australia get Ned Kelly tattoos. I think we need more people getting Mick Dundee tattoos. Number 9. That's not a knife. Oh yeah, we all know the iconic scene, the most famous scene in the movie. The scene where Mick Dundee is apprehended by a street gang with a switchblade knife, where he replies,
"That's not a knife. That's a knife."
This scene is so recognisable, it might just be the first thing people think of when they think Crocodile Dundee. However, not meaning to put a damper on the scene or ruin the fun for anyone, but that in fact wasn't a real knife, as the knife props that were used as Mick Dundee's iconic large knife were in fact made out of rubber or aluminium. And yet, somehow that just makes the scene funnier. Number 8. Mistaken identity. So apparently when Crocodile Dundee came out, some people from certain parts of the world were mistaking Paul Hogan for Clint Eastwood, as it's now a long-lived joke that some people actually get the two actors confused. Personally, I don't see it. It is possible that the comparison was just a joke that Hogan made up. Hogan actually has a history of impersonating the movie Tough Guy, as during the 70s he played a comical version of Eastwood in a sketch called A Fistful of Ravioli. And according to the Paul Hogan dramatisation miniseries Hogs, one day while dining in a restaurant, Eastwood approached Hogan's table and subtly threatened him with a butter knife over the allegations that people get the two of them confused. But regardless, the joke was so ongoing it was even referenced in Crocodile Dundee too.
You know who that was? Clint Eastwood!
Number 7. No one thought that the movie would be a hit.
I'm a real wild one, wild one, wild one, wild one.
Although Crocodile Dundee is a well-known and well-loved comedy classic nowadays, and was the second highest grossing movie of 1986 right after Top Gun, no one actually anticipated how huge Crocodile Dundee would be. So much so that 20th Century Fox didn't want to have anything to do with the movie, as after executives watched 20 minutes of the film, they flat out said no and refused to distribute it. Fearing the movie would be a flop, there are even talks of trimming the movie down and giving it American overdubs. I mean, I guess you can't blame the apprehension. After all, back in those days, Australian movies just didn't do too well, as there were heaps that just sort of went under the radar. In fact, at that time, I think the biggest Australian movies were the Mad Max films and Picnic at Hanging Rock. But regardless, Paramount Pictures ended up distributing the movie, and the movie became the huge hit that it was. And one Golden Globe later, Paul Hogan could give all those who doubted the project one big I told you so. Number 6. Significance of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So the movie literally starts off with a view of the iconic Sydney Harbour Bridge, which is actually a very fitting image to start the movie off with, as that's where Hogan himself started. Yeah, before he became famous, his rags to riches started all the way back at the Harbour Bridge, where a very young Hogan did indeed work as a rigger for the very famous Australian landmark, where he then swiftly got his break with the Channel 9 network. So yes, peoples who live outside Australia, if you ever find yourself in this great country and you're ever going along the Sydney Harbour Bridge, just remember, Mick Dundee himself helped with the maintenance of that bridge. Number 5. The hotel movie wasn't just coincidental. Now for more significance of what is otherwise meaningless scenery with Crocodile Dundee, as we turn our attention to Mick Dundee's New York apartment. In one of the shots of Dundee's room, we see a TV playing what looks like some old war movie. Nothing to it, right? Well, no, the movie that was showing was the 1965 movie Major Dundee. Yeah, Dundee, as in Crocodile Dundee. This is obviously a homage and a wink and a nudge, but it makes me wonder if that's where Hogan got the name Dundee from. After all, Major Dundee starred Charlton Heston, and Hogan would go on to cast Heston as God for his afterlife comedy Almost an Angel. And if you have never heard of Almost an Angel, well, that's because it came out the same time as Ghost, another supernatural movie that was dealing with the afterlife. One that was impossibly popular. Yep, that's why Almost an Angel has been almost unheard of. In fact, look at the Sue character. Her surname is Charlton. Yeah, this can't be more than just a coincidence. Number 4. Obscure locations. So the first part of the movie takes place in the Australian outback, where the Sue character turns up to do an article on the mysterious Crocodile Dundee. Although some of the location shots look truly stunning, actual filming there wasn't too much fun, as while filming in the outback, the cast and crew had to sleep in huts next to a miners' camp. Yeah, huts. Hardly movie luxury. And it would have been really awkward for poor Linda Kozlowski, as not only was she in a strange country, staying in huts, but she literally was the only American on set. She really must have felt like she was on another planet, but kudos to her for getting the job done. Even the New York locations were somewhat interesting, as the subway scene in the end where Sue declares her love for Mick was filmed in an abandoned subway station, which really makes you appreciate movie extras, because there are so many I never would have guessed that this was a non-functioning station. Number 3. Michael Hutchence invested in the movie. Crocodile Dundee had up to 1,400 investors, and one of them was in fact lead singer of INXS, Michael Hutchence. Yep, in 1986, not only was Michael Hutchence working on making one of the greatest rock-pop albums of all time, with Kick, but it seems that he also had an interest in seeing a fish-out-of-water romantic Australian comedy, and the investment surely would have paid off. I don't know why this makes me so happy, but it just does, because when you think Australia in the late 80s, the first things you'll probably think of is INXS and Crocodile Dundee. So it's great to know that these two powerhouses from Down Under joined forces and that one helped out the other. For all we know, having Michael Hutchence on board probably helped with Crocodile Dundee getting made in the first place. In other words, no Michael Hutchence, no Crocodile Dundee. Number 2. Wildlife on film. There is actually a pretty intense scene where a crocodile lunges out at the Sue character while she gets close to a river. The crocodile that attempts to attack Sue wasn't real. Whoa, I know, right? Big shock. Yeah, it's hardly surprising that in fact a prop crocodile had been used on the account that, you know, crocodiles eat people. And it would have been most definitely too dangerous to film a real croc. However, the buffalo that Mick Dundee knocks out with his mysterious hypnotism powers was real, and Hogan would go on to explain that it was very difficult filming with the buffalo, as it was big and weighed 2,000 pounds and really couldn't be bothered doing anything. Yeah, like all typical actors, the buffalo was stubborn and probably felt like he wasn't being appreciated enough as an actor. And so apparently while filming, the buffalo was on tranquilizers. Hence, he wasn't putting up much of a defense and easily falls asleep.
Out of the way, dopey!
Number 1. Americanized version. America actually got a very different version of Crocodile Dundee than the Australians did. Namely, some of the Australian slang that was cut out of the American version, out of fear that the American audience wouldn't understand it and get confused. Some shots of the outback scenery was trimmed down to help the movie flow faster to the New York scenes, and even some profanity was removed from the Americanized version, namely a scene where Mick comes face to face with a New York street pimp. In the Australian version, the pimp asks Mick,
"Are you gonna talk all night, my man, or you gonna fuck one of them?"
Whereas in the Americanized version, it was re-edited to screw.
"Are you gonna talk all night, my man, or you gonna screw one of them?"
Which to me kind of robs the scene of its true comedic value. The most baffling change to me is the title, as in Australia, the movie was simply called Crocodile Dundee, but in the American version, the word crocodile had to have quotation marks. In fact, look at that, that's a completely different logo altogether. This was supposedly done to let American audiences know that this wasn't another monster movie about a deadly reptile, on the account that Alligator came out a few years prior. Also, when the movie was released in America, it was so under Paramount Pictures, but here in Australia, it was a 20th Century Fox release. Look here, it even has it on the DVD's cover, 20th Century Fox. Anyway guys, that was my look into Crocodile Dundee. Without a doubt, a comedy classic that put Paul Hogan on the international map. A film that was probably many people's introduction to Australia. Yeah, some of the jokes may seem awkward and outdated now, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's a movie that actually has a big heart, with plenty of good humour all round. Anyway, I'm Minty, and all those other Crocodile Dundee reviews floating around out there, they're not real reviews. This is a real review. See ya!